Episode 241. Was it a dream? Holding Kathy stiffly, Jacob's mind went blank. Feeling her shaking from the sobs, he was at a loss for words. Kathy's tears showed her true feelings. Jacob had always thought of her as a girl who handled her emotions really well, and had never imagined she would look so fragile when she broke down. Jade and Julia stood to the side and pursed their lips. The old woman didn't make any moves as people had expected. Snowflake ran around Jacob and Kathy, howling anxiously.
"It's hard to leave, but I have to go."
With tears all over her face, Kathy pushed away from Jacob, sobbing. She stared at him for a long while.
"I used to like Jakey as a kid, and now I like Jacob. I can't and don't want to get over my feelings."
She rubbed her reddened nose.
"I wish everything well with you and Soph, your parents, and Grandma."
Jacob found her gaze full of hesitation and sadness. She held him in front of hundreds of people, crying her heart out. Jacob's mind was in a buzz, not able to think clearly.
"Master, it's about time we get back."
Jade took 2 steps forward and said. The old woman also walked forward and pulled Kathy into her arms. Jade tossed out a bracelet, lifting the 3 of them up. Before they left, they revealed their true powers as masters of the nascent soul realm. 8th level and the 7th level were both equivalents to the nascent soul realm. For the dragon cultivators, the higher level the cultivators were in, the more difficult for them to elevate. And that was why the Dragon Clan had a more detailed level system. Jade and Julia were at the low-tier 8th level, which was the equivalent of the top-tier nascent soul realm. The cultivators at the convention were stunned. Seeing the 2 masters of top-tier nascent soul realm serving the young man deferentially, they wondered if the young man was a grandmaster himself, but hiding his true powers. Thinking back to when the young man led the maids disguised in Foundation Establishment realm wandering among them, the cultivators shivered with fear. With masters of top-tier nascent soul realm as maids, the young man must be a grandmaster of the soul formation realm. That explained why the other top-tier master of nascent soul realm had not made a move when the young man messed with her disciple. The more they thought about it, the more convinced they felt. Meanwhile, the old woman looked at the lost expression on Kathy's face and touched her head with a slight sigh. Then, she vanished in a golden flash with Kathy. The overwhelming nature essence instantly filled the whole space between the sky and the earth. A huge hole appeared in the space between 5th heaven and 6th heaven. She was a cultivator of the soul formation realm. One slight strike from a grudging cultivator of the soul formation realm had pierced the space between the sky and the earth. Thousands of cultivators at the trading convention were dumbfounded. If the strike had been aimed at the venue of the trading convention, the thousands of cultivators would have all died, and the whole celestial mountain would have been shattered. Oblivious to the old woman's anger at 5th heaven, Jacob returned to land with Jade and Julia. He went back to his motel room, still mulling over Kathy's reaction. Seeing Jade and Julia still standing in his room, Jacob asked, "Why are you still here?"
"Master, it's midnight. Do you really want 2 girls to return at this hour?"
Jade said with an innocent look. Jacob could see right through it. Jacob glanced at them in resignation, knowing no one was their match under 5th heaven. On second thought, he felt it would be inconsiderate to drive them away after midnight. He nodded, saying, "You have to share a bed. I'll put 2 chairs together and I'll sleep on them so you can each have a bed."
"Thank you, Master."
Jade smiled joyously.
"Julia and I can share a bed."
She was just being lazy and had known Jacob wouldn't drive them out. Julia covered her smile at her sister's smug look. Jacob changed in the room itself as the sisters took the bathroom. He made his bed, turned on the TV, and found out that it was already 4 o'clock in the morning, which meant that he had to be up in less than 3 hours. Although they could be a little extra sometimes, Jacob was quite fond of Jade and Julia and agreed to most of their requests. Snowflake bounced on the thick carpet before jumping into Jacob's makeshift bed. Jacob lifted it carefully and tossed it back to the floor. This creature had been spoiled since it came outside that cave and had formed the habit of sleeping on a bed. Being tossed out by Jacob from his bed, Snowflake trotted to the bathroom and loitered at the opaque glass door. The door slid open, and Jade and Julia came out of the bathroom, dressed in night suits. They had planned this. Jacob rolled his eyes at their mischief. Seeing Snowflake waiting at the door, they immediately picked it up. Happily, Snowflake rubbed its furry head against them and settled into the bed, lying between them. Snowflake began to crawl around under the covers.
Snowflake, stay still.
Itchy with its fur, Jade and Julia pulled it from behind their backs. Snowflake stuck out its tongue and began to lick their arms. After half a night together, it had forgotten entirely about the sisters' threats. It abandoned Jacob and took the sisters as its patronesses. Time ticked away, and Jacob woke up at 7 in the morning. He turned to look at the other bed and found Jade and Julia were sleeping soundly. Exhausted by half a night's labor, Snowflake was also asleep on their beautiful hair, snoring contently. Jacob got up from the bed quietly. He entered the bathroom to wash up and change out of his pajamas. With little sleep, he still felt dizzy. Walking to the window, he pulled the curtains to a small crack and stared at the road outside. Although he didn't understand Kathy's emotional outburst, he couldn't forget the feeling of dread when he heard about her leaving. Sophie. Jacob murmured the name and touched the cold windowsill lightly. Probably in a different world, Kathy and he would have made a good couple, just as their friends said. He had too many things to worry about. His cultivation progress and his duty towards Sophie's clan were his first priority. Rubbing his temples, Jacob turned around and found Julia had woken up and was staring at him quietly in the bed. Julia blushed when Jacob turned abruptly, whispering,
Master.
Jacob gestured for her to be quiet. Go back to sleep.
Okay.
Julia nodded and lay back on the bed. Before she lay down, she blurted out,
Master, is something troubling you?
Nothing. I just feel frustrated that my cultivation has not progressed recently. Julia, do you want some breakfast? I'll bring you some from the restaurant, Jacob said.
Cultivation progress slows down with a troubled mind, Master. But I guess you're not troubled because of your cultivation progress, isn't it so?
Julia asked, looking at Jacob with her bright and gentle eyes. Am I too hesitant on some things? Jacob asked her.
Master, you are soft-hearted, so...
Julia bit her lip slightly.
But it's not a shortcoming. If you were a careless man, we wouldn't have stayed by your side.
Jacob looked at her and smiled. Julia smiled back, wondering if she said something right. With a slight sigh, Jacob walked out of the room and closed the door quietly behind him. He went to the restaurant for breakfast. He got his order fairly quickly, seeing that it was still early in the morning. He started eating quietly in a corner by the windows. Carrying a plate of waffles, Kathy appeared in front of him. She was surprised to see Jacob when he waved at her. She carried her food over to his table and took the seat across from him. Did you sleep well last night? Jacob asked.
Not bad.
Kathy nodded slightly before looking up at Jacob abruptly.
Last night, I had a strange dream in which the old woman talked and took me to a wondrous place.
Oh? Jacob arched his eyebrows.
I saw you in my dream.
Kathy continued after a few seconds of hesitation. Looking at her, Jacob understood. Kathy had not controlled her emotions with him because she thought it was a dream. In the dream, she thought about her imminent departure and burst into tears. Although she could control herself in real life, she had opened her heart when she thought she was in a dream.
What did you dream about last night?
Kathy asked him. Nothing unusual, Jacob said. Kathy stared at him and thought for a while.
The weirdest thing was not the dream, but this.
She reached out her hand, and there was a clear white emerald bracelet on her wrist. Episode 242, The Class President. In the early morning sunlight, the white emerald bracelet glittered white. On a closer look, Jacob could sense the nature essence in it. This was not an ordinary bracelet, but a treasure. Kathy bought it at the trading convention on the fifth heaven. Kathy took the bracelet off her wrist and looked at it against the sunlight pouring from the window. It was sparkling and clear without a trace of impurities. The bracelet would have been sold for hundreds of dollars in the mortal world. Kathy slid it back onto her wrist, and her gaze moved slowly toward Jacob.
I dreamed that Grandma bought the bracelet for me. When I woke up, I found the bracelet on my wrist.
Jacob looked at her, at a loss for words.
Let's go back to the previous question.
Kathy stared at Jacob.
Last night, were you in my dream?
Jacob thought for a while. Today, when we return home, I'll go with you to visit that woman.
Okay.
Kathy nodded. She was baffled, but didn't ask any more questions. She thought that if last night's dream was real, then she had really held Jacob and cried in his arms. Carefully, she looked up at Jacob, blushing. She had thought it was a weird and sad dream. However, Jacob looked at Kathy's pink face and thought for a while.
I'm sorry, Kathy. For what?
Kathy lifted her head.
For everything,
Jacob said. They fell into silence while white sunshine crept onto the table. I don't want you to leave. Jacob broke the silence.
Last night in the dream, I cried like a baby,
Kathy said after a few seconds of hesitation. I know, Jacob answered. Kathy stared at him, and Jacob exhaled deeply. Once again, they fell into silence.
You were here enjoying the sunshine so early in the morning.
Kathy's roommate suddenly appeared in front of them. They were so lost in themselves that they didn't see her walk into the restaurant. Her arrival broke the silence between Kathy and Jacob. Kathy hid her melancholy and smiled at her.
Why are you here so early? I spent the night at my aunt's. Since I had nothing to do in the morning, I came back to hang out with you. I found you were not in the room and guessed you might be having breakfast here.
She then winked at them.
Am I the third wheel here?
Kathy rolled her eyes and asked,
Have you had breakfast yet? No, I was planning to eat with you.
She sat down beside Kathy and said,
What do you want to eat?
Kathy asked her.
Scrambled eggs, bacon, and a milkshake. Probably a plate of those waffles, too, she said. You have a big appetite.
Kathy stood up and went to buy breakfast for her. When Kathy was gone, Her roommate looked at Jacob meaningfully. She smiled and pointed her finger at Jacob.
You are good. Kathy never gets close to guys, but you and her have become really close, right?
When she entered the restaurant, she saw Jacob and Kathy sitting together at the table next to the window and looking at each other in silence. They were not only a good pair in her eyes, but also great gossip material for her when they got back to their dorms. I just met Kathy here coincidentally. Jacob looked at her and explained.
Don't put up an innocent act.
She was all smiles, poking her finger into Jacob's shoulder. She sat up immediately when she saw Kathy walking to them, carrying her breakfast.
Here, your feast, ma'am.
Kathy put the breakfast on the table and sat back down. The girl didn't hesitate. She picked up the cutlery and began to eat. Between bites, she asked,
What's the plan for today? When do we leave for the game?
Kathy took out a paper napkin to clean her hands and was about to answer the question when her friend suddenly dropped her fork and grabbed Kathy's wrist.
Wow, the bracelet is so pretty. Where did you get it? Oh, I bought it at the night market last night,
Kathy said after a moment of consideration.
Really? I'll go buy one too,
her roommate cried in excitement.
I bought it at the night market and will have to leave today,
Kathy told her in exasperation.
I don't care. Today you and I will stay back to buy the bracelet. It's so pretty,
her roommate yelled willfully. Helplessly, Kathy moved her arm out of her grip.
They probably don't have another one. No, sell yours to me. How much did you pay for it? I'll double it.
She pestered Kathy with her demand.
Hey, we are not in the dorm. Stop it.
Kathy reminded her with a nudge of her arm. The girl realized Jacob was watching her. Knowing she had lost her composure, she immediately faked a cough and lowered her voice.
This bracelet is so beautiful. Will you sell it to me? I'll pay you 3 times the original price. How about 4 times? 5 times?
Watching her anxious expression, Jacob thought, if only she knew that this bracelet can't be bought with money. Seeing Kathy was unmoved by her badgering, her friend finally gave up.
Forget it. I'll try my luck back home to look for something similar. I'll go and find out if the guys have woken up yet. I so don't want to play the third wheel here.
She stood up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving a speechless Kathy who didn't know how to explain the situation. Kathy, why don't you go back to your room and rest? Jacob suggested.
Okay.
Kathy nodded before she blurted out,
It's still early. How about we hang out in your room?
What? Jacob was surprised.
What? I can't hang out in your room?
Kathy stared at Jacob.
No.
Jacob thought about Jade and Julia in his room. Although they were doing nothing and had only stayed the night in his room, it would be hard to explain to Kathy when she saw them.
Then you come to my room,
Kathy offered.
I'll call my roommate into my room and the 3 of us can hang out.
Jacob said, after a moment of consideration, Okay, I'll go to your room.
Good.
Kathy gave him a faint smile before leading him to her room. Kathy's room was very tidy. The bed was made, and her suitcase was neatly sitting in one corner. Her pillow was still damp, and Jacob guessed she must have been crying when she woke up this morning. Kathy also noticed the tear stains on the pillow. She walked over and flipped it over. Turning on the TV, she was about to go out and look for her friend when a knock sounded at the door. Kathy opened the door and saw her friend in the doorway. She walked into the room and saw Jacob. She immediately retreated and looked at Kathy slyly.
Oh, is this a bad time?
Hey, we were just about to call you. Come, let's watch a movie or something. Jacob called out to her.
No, I told you. I won't play the third wheel here.
she backed out of the room and shut the door behind her. Kathy blushed and glanced at Jacob in embarrassment. "Okay, we can watch a movie then." Jacob picked up the remote control. "Okay." Kathy kicked off her shoes and leaned against the headboard on the bed, turning her gaze to the TV. Jacob had been sitting on the edge of the bed. He moved slightly to one side so that he wouldn't block the TV. Although they were watching a movie, the fact that they were alone in the room was not lost on them. Jacob thought about Jade and Julia in his room, but he had no time for them now.
"Jacob, do you think I'm not likable or friendly? I don't think that many of our classmates want to talk to me."
Kathy leaned against the headboard with her hands clasped before her. She asked him in a low voice. "No, I don't think likability has anything to do with it. It's probably because you are the class president and everyone is just respectful towards you," Jacob said.
"I wanted to make everything in our class perfect."
Kathy bit her lip. "Because of you, everything in our class is quite orderly. Look at the mess other classes got themselves in. But our class is a very organized and consolidated unit." Jacob looked back at her and said,
"If I decide to stay, I'll quit as the class president,"
Kathy said abruptly. Episode 243, Officially a Couple. "Why?" Jacob looked at her in surprise.
"People think I'm power hungry, and some girls hate me. That stuff is trivial, but they make me uncomfortable,"
she said, pursing her lips. Evidently, she regarded Jacob as her close friend. Otherwise, she wouldn't have talked about little things that bother her greatly. The topic went on, and she began to tell him about many small incidents in the girls' dorm. Jacob listened to her patiently, without giving any input. Kathy had a position of power, no matter how small the power was, but it still made people jealous. They seemed to forget that she was also a normal human being who didn't like other girls to badmouth her behind her back, and minded the guys' opinions of her. 2 movies had ended in the background by the time the arms of the clock indicated that it was noon.
"Let's go to meet everyone in the hall."
Kathy looked up at the clock and said. Jacob found he had stayed almost 4 hours in Kathy's room, listening to her talk about the trivial things in her life.
"Let's go. I'll walk with you to your room to get your stuff."
Picking up her bag, she pulled Jacob out of her room. Ryan was walking out of a room across the corridor. He rubbed his eyes, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. Big news! Jacob just came out from Kathy's room. With Kathy close behind him, Jacob forced himself to open the door to his room. He was relieved to see that Jade and Julia had left, and they even made the bed.
"Your room smells fragrant."
Kathy took the opportunity to look around his room and commented. I spilled the shampoo last night," Jacob thought quickly. His sharp eyes saw several long hairs on the bed close to Kathy. If she saw them... At this crucial moment, Snowflake crawled out from under the bed.
"Snowflake?"
Kathy looked at Snowflake in pleasant surprise before glancing at Jacob.
"No wonder you didn't let me into your room. You brought Snowflake with you."
Snowflake scratched Kathy's long stockings with its claws before jumping up into her arms. It stuck out its tongue and licked her face. This creature was fawning on Kathy.
"It's settled! Settled!"
Outside Jacob's room, Ryan and others were piled up against the door while whispering in excitement.
"It seems Kathy has agreed to be Jacob's girlfriend after a day's consideration."
Ryan, at the bottom of the pile, heaved a sigh of relief. He turned to look up at the 5 heads above him and extended his hand.
"Pay up! I told you Jacob could win Kathy over.
Yeah, Jacob has indeed won over Kathy. The other guys exclaimed, as if they regretted having not made a move themselves before Jacob did. However, a bet's a bet. They had to pay Ryan the money they lost by disagreeing with him. When Jacob and Kathy walked out of the room, they found the guys from their class crowding at the doorway.
Okay, everyone, let's go to the hall.
Kathy raised her arm to direct them. At her call, everyone walked into the hall to check out. With a name list in her hand, Kathy collected the room keys and checked out for them. Her excellent organization skills showed how responsible she was. After the checkout, she made sure no one had forgotten anything in their rooms before leading the group to the bus going to the host university. The group was as lively as the day before, but everyone felt that Kathy was happier. They didn't know that it was because she felt lighter after her talk with Jacob. She had been carrying that stuff in her heart for quite some time.
I wish I had pursued Kathy. She isn't such a great challenge after all.
She's Jacob's girlfriend now, so you can't. But I can see why you're pining. She's gorgeous.
That Jacob must have sweet-talked her into saying yes.
The guys talked among themselves on the bus. The bus arrived at the main gate of the university where the match was held, and Kathy led them off the bus. The primary purpose of their trip was to cheer for their university's basketball team. The stadium of the host university was not far from the main gate. Since the guys were hungry, Kathy led them to the cafeteria for food. When they were eating, they heard the guys from the other university whisper about Kathy.
Jacob, you're a lucky dog.
Sitting beside Jacob, Ryan said out of jealousy. What are you talking about? Jacob asked.
I mean Kathy.
Ryan signaled in her direction.
Everyone thought Kathy was a challenge and no one dared to make a move. Now they're regretful. Look, even the guys on their side are talking about Kathy's beauty.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I think you're really pretty and would love to get to know you better. Can I have your phone number? Seeing Kathy and her friend eating alone, a handsome guy walked over and asked Kathy. Kathy looked up at him and didn't know how to say no, so she told him,
I'm sorry, but I'm seeing someone.
The guys started talking noisily after hearing that. They obviously assumed that she was talking about Jacob. Although they were a bit jealous of Jacob winning over Kathy, they were glad that her boyfriend was someone from their class instead of some guy from another class or another school. Anyway, Jacob was liked by most of the guys in their circle. Hearing the guys' loud and boisterous comments, the guy who came over to Kathy impulsively realized that she was with them, and one of them must be her boyfriend. He left, feeling mortified. Kathy had always been beautiful, but under the old woman's influence, she had begun looking all the more stunning lately. After all, each time when she visited the old woman, she was absorbing her nature essence. Without cultivating, she had reached level 1 chi refinement realm. After getting food at the cafeteria, Kathy led the group to the stadium to watch the game. When they entered the stadium, Sam was doing warm-up exercises in a yellow jersey.
Damn, you guys are so late. I thought you wouldn't come.
He shouted at the sight of his classmates.
I gave up the opportunity to meet some pretty girls to watch your game,
Ryan retorted. He was excited since it was the first time he watched Sam in an official game. He would have come to cheer him no matter what. After all, this was a championship game, and one of the main players was his close friend. Kyle was wiping his sweat, standing on the sideline of the basketball court, and he nodded at Kathy when he saw her. He would go to the UK to pursue his postgraduate degree in a short while. Otherwise, he would probably be leading the team to win the championship of the National League.
Let's find seats.
Kathy dragged her roommate and Jacob by their arms. Their classmates followed them. The players of the opposing team began to enter the court. Gradually, the students of the other college filed into the stadium to watch their home game. Kathy took out a banner from her bag and handed it to Ryan behind her.
"Put this up."
The guys scrambled to spread the banner before holding it up high.
"Go, Kyle! Go, Sam!"
Seeing this banner, Sam forgot his nervousness, and his morale was greatly boosted.
"Okay, I'll show you my best."
Playing an away game was not easy, but seeing his class come to cheer for him in his first formal match, Sam was determined to win the game. When the match began, their class, which was mostly guys, yelled together,
"Go! Go, Sam!"
Their uniformed cheering was more distinct than the boisterous cheering voices of the other college's students. Their basketball team was last year's national champion, and the cooperation between Kyle and Sam was seamless. The basketball team of the other university obviously underestimated the small-sized Sam, who scored repeatedly.
"Go! Go, Sam!"
The guys' voices were hoarse, but they kept cheering for him. On the court, Sam got better each minute, and the game ended with Kyle's team winning by 16 points, and Sam alone scored 25 points. The opponent's team had been strong the year before, but it was utterly defeated by Kyle's team. Their team won the first game in the basketball league. After the game, the two teams stayed at the stadium for some after-game activities, while Kathy led the class back home by bus. The bus drove smoothly on the highway, and it was only 6 p.m. when they returned to their city. It was not dark yet. Before the bus reached their university, Kathy got off earlier, intending to go home and pick up some stuff. The guys urged Jacob to walk Kathy home. Some of them even came up to push him off the bus. Under such insistent urging, Jacob had no choice but to get off the bus. He had, anyway, decided to visit the old woman with Kathy. The sooner the better. Well, the others were quite bossy. Looking at the bus by the road, Jacob said in embarrassment.
"What? Did you do what you did because they forced you?"
Kathy put the backpack on her back and turned to ask him.
"No, not really. Anyway, I'm glad you're not leaving," Jacob said.
Kathy pursed her lips and walked to the shanty houses nearby, with Snowflake snuggled warmly in her arms. The white emerald bracelet glittered in the setting sun. It was about time to find out the truth about the strange dream. Episode 244. Marry Her. Wires were hanging everywhere in the area, and the houses were lined up in a mess. It was supposed to be taken down a dozen years ago, but it never happened. The narrow alleyway, dirty walls, uneven ground, and shadows reminded Jacob of his childhood. Kathy walked beside Jacob, and there were two little shadows in front of them, just the same as when she followed Jakey around as Little Carrot. She didn't know that she would still be following Jacob around now that she was older, too. Snowflake hopped out of Kathy's arms to chase after a mixed-breed puppy nearby. The puppy had never seen something so much stronger than itself, so it immediately stayed still. Snowflake soon lost interest in the pup and returned to Jacob's side. It was difficult for it to find a playmate due to its ability. However, Snowflake itself was very picky. Many students wanted to hug it when Kathy took it to the game, but it didn't let any guys except Jacob touch it. Only girls, only beautiful girls, had a chance to hug it. It hopped around Jacob and Kathy like a fluffy white ball as they arrived at the old woman's house. The walls of the house were shared with the neighbors. There was a window that seemed to have not been opened for years and an old wooden door. The wall was leaning outside, showing how dangerous it would be to live inside. Jacob would have never thought that a grandmaster who was as powerful as Jade and Julia lived in such a place.
Grandma! Grandma!
Kathy stepped forward to knock on the door. There was no response after a few minutes. Kathy was a little worried. She saw the neighbor was cooking, so she went over.
Excuse me, ma'am. Is the woman who lives here home? I haven't seen her in a few days, although she usually doesn't come out a lot,
the woman answered as she cooked.
Thank you.
Kathy went back to Jacob and looked at him, worried.
Do you think something happened to Grandma? She hasn't been feeling well lately.
Jacob had assumed that the old woman was not immortal when he met her at the trading convention on Fifth Heaven. But Kathy still wasn't sure if it was a dream. From what she knew, the old woman's health condition was worrisome. "We can open the door and take a look inside?" Jacob asked. He wanted to see what kind of master this old woman was, and Kathy was truly worried about her. It must be hard to be an elderly person and live all alone. Kathy felt sorry for her, so she came to visit, keep her company, and take care of her every weekend.
Let's figure out a way to get inside.
Kathy frowned and nodded. Jacob put his hand on the door and put a little bit of force on it. The fragile door opened under the quake. There were no tiles lined up in the room. The rotten iron lock fell onto the damp dirt ground. Jacob picked it up and examined the place carefully. The old lady was not in the room. Kathy opened the door to let the humid air out. She once offered the old woman some money to renovate the place, but she didn't agree to it.
Grandma's not here. She probably went out.
Kathy was actually a bit relieved, seeing that she wasn't in the room. Jacob nodded and looked around the room. He wasn't sure if it was very rude to intrude into another cultivator's territory, but he assumed that it shouldn't be a problem since he came in with Kathy. A wide wooden bed, a table and set of chairs, a bowl on the table with a crack in it, and an old kettle seemed to be everything the old woman owned. She didn't even have a blanket.
Grandma told me that her son would come to visit her a few days ago. Maybe she is out with him. It would be better for her to live with her son, given how old she is.
Kathy walked around the gloomy, narrow room and said. She was sure that it was only a dream now. The old woman even had trouble walking. How would she be able to take her into the sky for a visit? As for the bracelet, she thought maybe she forgot about buying it at the night market last night because of the mess. What one thinks about reflects in one's dream. She even dreamed of obtaining this bracelet from heaven. The more she thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. She felt a sense of alienation when she thought about herself crying in Jacob's arms in the dream.
Where are Grandma's blankets? Doesn't she need it when she sleeps?
Kathy was suddenly concerned about the old woman's living conditions. She patted Jacob as he carefully examined every corner of the room.
What are you looking at?
Oh, I'm trying to see if the structure of the room is logical, Jacob said. He read a whole bunch of architectural books lately and had some sense and concept of the space. He found the room not as simple as it may seem. Each tilt seemed to have its reason. Even the little puddle of dirt followed a precise law. This was an array formation. In other words, it was a space built in the real world. Jacob and Kathy entered the old woman's world the second they stepped in the door. Just like Snowflake and Jacob's necklace, the two of them were inside the old woman's storage space. Perhaps it was only a little pearl in her hand, and she might have already sensed Jacob and Kathy's entering. Jacob gasped at the thought of it.
What structure could a broken shed like this have?
Kathy dragged Jacob's arm.
Help me lift the mattress. Grandma's blanket could be inside the bed. It's nice outside, so I'm going to hang it under the sun for a while.
She led Jacob to the bedside. Jacob used his force to lift the mattress. A ray of gold light almost blinded them. After their eyes got used to the intense light, they saw countless treasures, techniques, and elixirs right in front of them.
What are these?
Kathy widened her eyes and asked Jacob. The area was divided into 3 sections by metal wires, which glittered with silver light. In the left section were different kinds of treasures. In the middle section were neatly piled cultivation technique scrolls. In the right section were bottles of elixir pills. Obviously, Jacob's 5-elemental sword array formation had been picked out from this collection. Looking at the treasures emitting overwhelming nature essence, Jacob sensed they were top-tier treasures that were more powerful than Henry's dragon gold spear. Any of them could be made into a natal treasure. The wooden door behind them was pushed open gently. Kathy, who had been alarmed by what she saw, was startled by the sound. She and Jacob turned their heads simultaneously and found the old woman walking into the room slowly with a bunch of vegetables in her hand.
Grandma, we weren't trying to peek at your stuff.
Kathy stammered and couldn't find the right words. Jacob immediately lowered the mattress. The old woman walked over and put the vegetables on the table. Pulling out the chair, she nodded at Jacob and Kathy and pointed to the bed. Jacob pulled the surprised Kathy to sit on the bed.
I have only a few words to say to you.
Looking at Kathy and Jacob, she lifted her hand and pointed at Jacob.
You must marry Kathy. I have made the decision,
she said. Episode 245. Time to break in.
What?
Kathy was confused.
That's all. You can go now.
The old woman waved her hand at Jacob. Before Jacob could get any words out, a huge force pushed him outward. Her overbearing attitude was more aggressive than that of both Kenneth and Dracon combined. Just when Jacob was out of the house, the old woman's voice came out of it.
Today I paid another visit to the Dragon God Shrine. If they can't solve this problem, I'll take the matter into my own hands. As for the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, I'll go visit it in person.
A powerful force exploded behind Jacob in the narrow pathway, pushing him forward more than a dozen steps. It was a small punishment for Jacob's ambivalent attitude toward Kathy. After the pain, Jacob felt a pure nature essence coming from the explosion and entering his body. 4 openings were unlocked in his dragon core. It was a small reward for his attentive care for Kathy in the past 2 days. Jacob looked back and found that he was at the gate of his campus. The old woman had tossed him from one space into another. This technique of manipulating spaces was even beyond the abilities of Kenneth and Susan. The old woman was a more powerful figure than the 8th level masters. What was above the 8th level? It was the Heavenly Dragon Realm or the Soul Formation Realm. The honking of the cars shocked him from the daze. He looked around and found he was standing right in front of the gate, blocking the cars from entering the school. He stepped aside. Then he walked to his dorm building and cultivated the Sword Shadow Scroll while he walked. Successive explosions appeared in Jacob's dragon core. The explosions unlocked more than a dozen openings. By now, 39 openings had been unlocked, and he would reach the third level after unlocking just one more. By giving him a push in the void, the old woman buried a small explosive in Jacob's body. Jacob triggered the explosive by cultivating the Sword Shadow Scroll, and they unlocked those openings. This unlocking method was quite aggressive, and Jacob almost spat out a mouthful of blood under its great force. However, after the temporary discomfort, he felt refreshed. She had purposefully left one opening for Jacob to unlock. In fact, the old woman's push was more a reward than a punishment. She knew the early stage of the Sword Shadow Scroll was slow and had just given him a boost. Feeling the changes in his body, Jacob was pleasantly surprised. While he was walking toward his dorm, it suddenly occurred to him that if the old woman had buried in him a huge explosive instead of a small one, he would have died in pieces instead of getting his openings unlocked. At this thought, Jacob broke out in a sweat. After washing up in the bathroom, Jacob found the others were chilling together. He climbed up to his bed to cultivate. The old woman had unlocked more than 10 openings in his dragon core with one light strike, and he needed to spend one night solidifying the realm. Monday morning came in the blink of an eye. Jacob got up and walked to the balcony. Looking up, he found countless cultivators had surrounded the 9-dragon palace in the sky. It looked like a beehive surrounded by a dense mass of bees. I observed the night sky and felt that something important would happen. In his pajamas, Ryan walked into the room balcony and stood behind Jacob. Jacob was startled and immediately turned around to look at him. Ryan had his usual mocking expression on his face, and Jacob was relieved that he was just teasing him. Ryan leaned close to Jacob and said, "Jacob, do you think the twins will make a scene when they find out that you and Kathy are going out? Hey, do me a favor and talk me up to the twins, okay?" Jacob looked at him, speechless. Maybe, in the eyes of the guys, Jade and Julia ignored them because the sisters liked Jacob. Jacob looked up at the dark sky again and gave priority to the business of the 9-dragon palace. He guessed the reason Henry had not come to him to get back his natal treasure was that he was preparing to enter the 9-dragon palace. Today was the day the cultivators would break into the 9-dragon palace. Jacob left the dorm and went to find Susan in her office. As if she had known Jacob would come, her door was open when he got there.
There are more cultivators than at any of the times in the past. Most of the cultivators of the sects in 6th Heaven have come.
Without any delay, Susan got to the point. In the sky that could be seen out of her window, the colorful and glittering realm shields were like bees flying around the 9-dragon palace. "Should we ask Jade and Julia to join us?" Jacob asked her.
"No, there are too many people who are trying to break into the palace, far more than I expected. I'm afraid I will have too much on my plate if they join us,"
Susan said lightly. "When will we do it?" Jacob asked.
"About 10 o'clock.
Susan answered. "What do we do now?" Jacob asked again.
"Cultivate."
Susan threw him this word before sitting down cross-legged and closing her eyes. "Oh." Jacob choked back his words and sat down on his usual spot. The nature essence in Susan's office was more intense than outside as a result of the array formations she built around the room. Jacob concentrated on his cultivation, hoping he could unlock the last opening and reach the 3rd level, which was a significant milestone. In the cultivation sects, the 3rd level was the equivalent of the core formation realm. However, this one step would take people different lengths of time to reach. It would take some cultivators only a few months or even a few days, But it might also take many years. For some of the cultivators, they would never reach this realm in their whole lives. With the aid of the Dragon Core, Jacob's cultivation speed was almost hundreds of times faster than that of an ordinary cultivator. If an ordinary cultivator practiced the Sword Shadow Scroll, he or she would make progress like a snail. The nature essence entered Jacob's body thread by thread. It traveled to the Dragon Core and nurtured it. The Sword Shadow Scroll was not the fastest technique, but it was the steadiest one. Like hearts beating, the 39 openings vibrated at the same time, connecting themselves with Jacob's body. Was it the feeling of the third level? The so-called core formation was the process of forming a gold core in one's body. The third level for dragon cultivators is the process of fully activating the dragon core in the body. While Jacob was savoring the feelings in his body and trying to find an opportunity to break through, Susan, sitting opposite him, said suddenly,
"It's time. Let's go."
With a white flash, Susan pulled Jacob into the high sky in an energy sphere. Her expression was grimmer than before, as if she was determined to make the trip to the Nine Dragon Palace a great success, with Jacob as her live map. Countless cultivators flying on swords surrounded the huge Nine Dragon Palace. They were all waiting for the best moment to break into it. Susan released her aura of a middle-tier 8th-level cultivator. Nascent Soul Realm! The nearby cultivators of Foundation Establishment Realm and Core Formation Realm were startled and moved hundreds of meters away from them.
"An 8th-level dragon cultivator!"
someone yelled. Ignoring their comments, Susan looked back and saw Jacob standing behind her and holding tightly onto her arms. Her face turned livid.
"Let go!"
Looking down at the land tens of thousands of meters below him, Jacob kept his grip on Susan's arms.
"Are you kidding me? You can fly on a sword, but I'll die if I fall."
Under the stare of the cultivators who were hundreds of meters away, Susan couldn't keep her composure of a master anymore. She bumped Jacob's chest with her elbow.
"Let go and release your spirit beast." "Snowflake?"
Jacob froze for a moment before letting go of one of Susan's arms and taking out the furry snowflake from his hidden space.
"Toss it out,"
Susan instructed.
"Toss it?"
Jacob was baffled. Although Snowflake was shameless sometimes, he still liked the little creature.
"This little guy is lazy, but it has powers."
Susan was losing her temper. Snowflake looked at Jacob innocently, but Jacob decided to trust Susan. He tossed Snowflake into the sky. Snowflake dropped like a rock.
"Susan, help Snowflake!"
Jacob yelled anxiously. Dozens of meters below them, Snowflake grew large. Flames appeared on its 4 paws, and it flew up. Episode 246.
"Thomas."
Snowflake floated in the air with its paws enveloped by flames before flying to Jacob reluctantly.
"You little pup! You concealed your power from me."
Jacob reached out and gave it a light smack on its head. It shamed all snow lions. Jacob guessed that Snowflake must have been tossed out by the other snow lions due to its shameless ways. It must have been a lazy and troublesome cub who had a big appetite.
"After eating so many essence replenishment pills, it's natural that it has elevated,"
Susan commented lightly before pushing Jacob off her sword. Jacob lost his balance, and he was immediately pulled over Snowflake's back. With a slight drop, Snowflake was able to carry Jacob on its back.
Higher-leveled spirit beasts need to consume more nature essence, which means that it will need more elixirs, Susan continued.
Jacob hesitated for a few seconds before asking, "Can it degrade to its former level?"
No,
Susan answered him coldly. Jacob was speechless. Although it was quite dashing to ride on Snowflake, it was quite a burden to feed it properly. It seemed that the 1-month stock of elixirs and celestial herbs he got for Snowflake wouldn't even last half a month. If the nearby cultivators had known that this spirit beast cost him over 40 mid-tier spirit stones in half a month, they would have been astonished. "Get out of my way!" Suddenly, an overbearing voice sounded nearby. Henry, the crown prince of South Atlantic, was sitting on a huge gold weaving shuttle, and he was the one who spoke those arrogant words. Standing behind him was Tom Lester, the inspector who hated Jacob, controlling the gold weaving shuttle.
Who is this kid?
The nearby cultivators were about to teach Henry a lesson when they found the aura of Tom, who was on low-tier 8th level. Nascent Soul Realm! The human cultivators were astonished and backed off from him as well. Even with the background of the cultivation sects, they dared not to mess with a nascent Soul Realm cultivator. In the range of 1 mile, Susan and Jacob, Tom and Henry faced each other.
Mr. Lester, I remember that you were expelled to the bitter cold northwest. How come you are here?
Susan said to Tom sarcastically.
I wanted to ask you the same question. As an inspector, how dare you try to break into the Nine Dragon Palace without permission?
Tom retorted. Susan's face fell, not wanting to argue with him. It was evident that Tom favored the South Atlantic, and she would ignore him as long as he didn't mess with her. Sitting on the gold weaving shuttle, Henry reached out his hand and said to Jacob,
"Give it back!"
"Come to me when you have the ability to get it from me." Jacob ignored the arrogant young man.
"You'll regret it!"
Henry glared at Jacob and said viciously. Not caring to argue with Henry, Jacob steered Snowflake in another direction to observe the situation. This time, North Atlantic had sent out a team of senior elders, and he believed that the other 3 ocean clans did the same. Since the Nine Dragon Palace appeared above their city, the North Atlantic Dragon Palace could send a bigger team than the other 3 dragon palaces. He didn't see the official teams of the 4 clans and guessed that they must be in other areas around the Nine Dragon Palace. Tom must have sensed Susan with the unique connection between inspectors, and that was why he came their way. Besides the ocean dragon clans, some mighty river and lake dragon clans had also come. On top of water elemental dragon clans, the other 4 elemental dragon clans had also sent their teams. So many forces were calculating the time and waiting for the perfect opportunity to break into the Nine Dragon Palace when the palace's defense array formations were at their weakest. Therefore, no one would waste their energy on fighting outside of the Nine Dragon Palace. They would wait until they had entered it. "Susan, it seems that the human cultivators are mostly low-leveled." Observing the surrounding situation alertly, Jacob asked Susan.
"Right. None of them are above core formation realm,"
Susan answered. When Susan didn't offer an explanation, Jacob had to ask again. Why didn't they send more powerful cultivators?
"It would be a declaration of war if the human cultivators on nascent soul realm showed their faces below 5th heaven. Currently, they are only cultivators on the foundation establishment realm, with a handful of cultivators on the core formation realm. Their target is the Nine Dragon Palace. As long as they don't land on the ground, we'll tolerate them," Susan explained. Jacob nodded. The dividing line was 5th heaven. The dragon cultivators and the human cultivators kept to themselves in peace. Although there were a lot of cultivators of the lower realms here, they didn't pose any threats.
But if nascent soul realm cultivators appeared below fifth heaven, especially in first heaven, which was closest to land, the situation would be different.
It's almost time.
Susan's face turned serious. Also, the nearby human cultivators began to emit their auras. The colorful energy spheres gradually formed patterns. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. They were emitting different elemental essences. Each of the cultivators began to move in the sky like a small piece in a game of chess, according to their different elemental essences, forming huge array formations in the air. Obviously, they were very familiar with such array formations. The core formation realm cultivators flew up to a higher position and directed the movements of thousands of foundation establishment realm cultivators. Since they couldn't place spirit stones and treasures in the air, the foundation establishment realm cultivators built array formations with their bodies. Jacob looked around and found that the other groups of human cultivators had all formed huge array formations. Each array formation represented one cultivation sect. He counted and found that there were at least 56 sects around him. The glittering array formations surrounded the Nine-Dragon Palace like pictures that were hovering in midair, and it was a magnificent sight. Some smaller sects had sent all their foundation establishment realm cultivators, trying to gain a better chance of entering the Nine-Dragon Palace. Susan, should we make a move now? Seeing the cultivation sects activating the huge array formations, Jacob asked Susan anxiously.
Be patient,
Susan answered coolly. Finally, one of the cultivation sects made the first attack with its array formation. Hundreds of foundation establishment realm cultivators moved together. Colorful light beams dashed toward the Nine-Dragon Palace like lasers. The black mist surrounding the Nine-Dragon Palace instantly dispersed a bit. Meanwhile, other array formations began to launch their attacks. The powerful attacks landed on the outer edge of the Nine-Dragon Palace, but the palace was still intact. They only scattered some of the mist around it. Since the nascent Soul Realm cultivators couldn't show their faces publicly below Fifth Heaven, the sects had to rely on a large number of Foundation Establishment Realm cultivators to mimic the attack of a nascent Soul Realm cultivator. Under the repeated attacks, the Nine-Dragon Palace finally shook slightly.
A large number of human cultivators are saving us energy,
Susan said while looking at the attacks on the palace. She slowly turned to face Jacob and continued.
The defense array formations of the Nine-Dragon Palace are not stable, and a small crack will appear in it. I will bring you in through one of the cracks, and you must follow me closely.
Sitting on Snowflake's wide back, Jacob nodded. When the human cultivators were attacking the Nine-Dragon Palace in groups, the dragon cultivators would take the opportunity and slip in. That was why the dragon cultivators tolerated the presence of the human cultivators in First Heaven. 8th level and 7th level dragon cultivators would be the first to enter. They continued their attacks, trying to break a crack in it. Finally, beams of white light began to leak from the bottom of the Nine-Dragon Palace.
Move!
Pulling Jacob after her, Susan flew toward one of the cracks, and Snowflake followed closely. Without hesitation, Henry and Tom also shot toward the nearest crack. After 2 more attacks, the human cultivators also followed them, flying toward the cracks nearest to them. It was the moment to enter the Nine-Dragon Palace.
Oh, I forgot to tell you that demon beasts run wild in the Nine-Dragon Palace. It will be very dangerous in there.
Pulling Jacob behind her, Susan suddenly turned her head and said,
What? Why didn't you tell me earlier?
Jacob shouted. He knew that he had been tricked by Susan once again.
The weakest demon beasts in there are at level 9. You better follow me closely after we enter the palace," Susan continued.
Jacob had no idea about the power structure of demon beasts. However, he knew that Snowflake wasn't even at level 1, so he could only imagine the great power of a level 9 demon beast. Pulled by Susan, Jacob couldn't back off now. The crack leaking white light was only a few meters away from them. An intense prehistoric essence greeted them, and the furious roars of demon beasts were deafening. While half of their bodies were in the crack, a voice overshadowing all demon beasts resonated in the air with overwhelming pressure.
"Who dares to disturb my sleep?"
Instantly, the demon beasts in the Nine Dragon Palace fell silent. 2 seconds later, another furious roar sounded from inside.
"All of you, get out of here!"
The extremely powerful pressure spread through all the cracks in the Nine Dragon Palace. The auspicious white clouds instantly turned to a weird black color, and tens of thousands of cultivators near the Nine Dragon Palace were pushed away. Sensing the danger, Susan covered Jacob with her body. Despite her effort, she, Jacob, and Snowflake were all blown out of the cracks by the great wind and were knocked away for several miles.
"The Nine Dragon Palace will be closed for 500 years. I'm Thomas."
The Nine Dragon Palace was engulfed in black light. It blinked twice before vanishing into the void. Episode 247: Injuries and Casualties. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of cultivators were knocked out and flew in the air like kites with broken strings. More than half of the Foundation Establishment Realm cultivators were greatly injured, while some had even lost their lives. Some of the careless Core Formation Realm cultivators got their golden cores damaged. Susan protected Jacob with her body and took on most of the offensive energy. After flying out several miles, she steadied herself and spat out a mouthful of blood. Even as a mid-tier 8th-level cultivator, which was equivalent to top-tier nascent soul realm, she couldn't safeguard herself from a tiny portion of Thomas's force. Jacob, who had flown out thousands of meters and was about to drop onto the ground, was caught by Snowflake. Then, it flew back to Susan with Jacob on its back. Seeing the blood on her lips, Jacob knew that she was severely wounded. He immediately flew over to her on Snowflake and held on to her. It was fortunate that Snowflake had just advanced in levels. Otherwise, Jacob would have died and wouldn't have been able to help Susan. Snowflake was quite useful at critical moments. Jacob looked up and saw the whining cultivators flying in the sky. Their treasures were all ruined, falling to the ground like rocks. Obviously, the cultivation sects suffered significant losses. Although the Foundation Establishment Realm cultivators were not powerful, they were the foundation of each sect. On the other hand, the Core Formation Realm cultivators had high power and were the main forces in the sects. For the smaller sects on Fifth Heaven, the great losses in these two groups of cultivators would result in their downfalls.
"Let's go back."
Susan looked up at the tragic sight and said to Jacob. Without hesitation, Jacob helped Susan onto Snowflake's back before riding it back onto the land. He released an energy sphere to avoid being seen by ordinary people, and they returned to Susan's office shortly. Back in her office, Susan took out several elixir pills from her ring. She swallowed them and immediately sat down to cultivate. She was not prepared for the attack and experienced most of the damage. With her cultivation strength at the 8th level, she could have dodged the attack. However, she was concerned about Jacob and had to protect him. Therefore, she had to get injured. Snowflake shrunk to its palm-sized self without being asked. Thinking of its excellent behavior, Jacob took out an essence replenishment pill and a spirit replenishment pill and fed Snowflake. After swallowing the elixir pills, Susan began to digest the energy from the pills with a frown. Afraid of disturbing her cultivation, Jacob picked up his cell phone that he left in her office and walked out of the room to call Dracon. The call was answered after several seconds, and Dracon's firm voice came from the phone.
Jacob, how are you doing?
We were kicked out before we could enter it. There are large casualties among the cultivators who tried to break into the palace. How about the elders from our clan? Jacob asked.
2 were seriously injured, and 1 got some minor injuries. They are all in the Dragon Palace getting treatments. How about you? Are you hurt?
I'm fine, but Susan is injured. She's healing now, and I don't know how serious her injury is, Jacob answered.
Okay, I'll send Elder Liam to check up on her.
How is Soph? Is she okay? Jacob asked anxiously.
The usual. I've reinforced security in her school so that she will be safe for the time being,
Dracon said. Jacob hung up with unease. Returning to the office, he saw Susan still cultivating, but her face was no longer that pale. Shortly, Liam hurried to the office. After seeing that Jacob was okay, he turned to Susan and asked in a low voice,
Miss Susan, are you okay?
I'm fine. My meridians are damaged, and they need some time to recover, Susan answered with her eyes closed.
With the order of the Dragon King, I'm here to take you to the Dragon Palace to recover. I hope you will accept his offer,
Liam said politely. Susan thought for a while and opened her eyes.
Okay.
Her injuries weren't light, and she couldn't activate her nature essence for a while. She would be safer in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace for the time being, so she had no choice but to owe another favor to them.
Let's go.
Briskly, Liam led the way. After the disappearance of the Nine Dragon Palace, the cloudy sky had turned clear all of a sudden. Liam ushered Jacob and Susan into his car that was parked at the entrance of the building, and he drove them quickly to Sophie's home. In the past hundreds of years, all parties had organized their teams to break into the Nine Dragon Palace when it appeared in the mortal world. No one had expected that the situation would be different this time. They arrived soon and quickly entered the house. Dracon and Helen were both at home, and even Sophie was there. She must have been called back from her school. In the room, Dracon looked grim. When he saw Liam enter with Susan, he just gave her a polite smile. In this situation, even Sophie was quiet. She looked at Susan in concern. "Let's go." Dracon tossed out an ancient-looking black sword. When everyone was on it, the sword shot into the sky. The city seemed to be in chaos due to the massive loss of human cultivators. On land, the ordinary people continued with their daily lives, oblivious to what had happened except for the change in the weather. However, in the sky, the human cultivators were in a frantic state. Today's event was a disaster for the human cultivation world. Comparatively, the dragon cultivators got fewer casualties, since most of the cultivators who went there were above the 5th level, which was the equivalent to the low-tier nascent soul realm. They were a lot more powerful.
Would the cultivation sects do anything since so many human cultivators died on First Heaven?
Liam said in a low voice on the sword. Dracon remained silent. After all, the disaster happened in the territory of his clan. If the cultivation sects on 5th Heaven and up wanted to find someone to blame, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan would be the first pick.
According to the agreement, they should not have come to First Heaven in the first place,
Helen said with a snort. We'll talk about it when we return to the Dragon Palace, Dracon said, displeased. The huge sword accelerated, and it submerged into the sea with the transparent energy sphere around it. The defense array formation of the Dragon Palace had been opened for them, and Dracon led the group into the plaza in front of the main palace and instructed Liam to find a place for Susan to rest and recover. General Arthur jogged to them and greeted them.
"Greetings to Dragon King, Queen, Princess, and—"
"Okay," Dracon interrupted him. "How are the elders doing?"
"They are all resting in their homes. We allocated 2 godly elixir pills to the 2 seriously injured elders,"
General Arthur reported. "Okay, let's go and visit them." Dracon nodded. General Arthur took Dracon's order and led the way. Jacob and Sophie followed them. No matter what identities they had in the mortal world, they were the prince and princess in this dragon palace. It would be the first time that Jacob attended to the business of North Atlantic as the prince. They visited the 3 injured elders one by one, and Dracon was relieved to find that they were not in life-threatening danger. Returning to the main palace, he asked General Arthur, "Where is Inspector Susan?"
"She's in Elder Kayla's home,"
General Arthur answered politely. "Lead me to her," Dracon said.
"Yes, Your Majesty."
General Arthur led the way. They walked along the winding corridors in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace before entering a small, quiet palace. In a white robe, Elder Kayla was preparing and cooking herbs in the yard.
"Your Majesty."
At the sight of Dracon and Helen, Elder Kayla stood up and greeted them. "Well," Dracon looked at her and asked, "How is Susan?"
"She is seriously injured. It will take probably 1 month for her to heal,"
Kayla said. "Can I go in and visit her?" Dracon asked.
"It's not necessary."
Kayla declined his offer. She turned to look at Jacob and said,
"But she said that the prince could go in."
Dracon turned to Jacob. "Jacob, you can go in and see her."
"Okay."
Jacob followed Elder Kayla. Traveling through a small garden, Jacob came to the door of a quiet side room. Kayla led him inside. Lying in bed, Susan had lost her usual spirit and looked sick. Obviously, her injury was severe and she had been holding it in.
"Master."
Seeing Kayla coming into the room, Susan greeted her in a low voice. Kayla walked over and took out a porcelain bottle from her sleeve, placing it on the small chair beside the bed.
"These are top-tier 100-flower pills. Take 3 pills each day."
Without further ado, she left the room. Her coldness was identical to Susan's. However, Jacob had seen her grinding those herbs patiently and knew that she looked cold but was caring. She was worried about her disciple, Susan. The door closed with a click. The room was dim and quiet. Lying in bed, Susan looked at Jacob and said,
"My injury is severe, and I need to stay in the Dragon Palace to recover. During my absence, I authorize you to manage the business in this region for me. You will be the temporary inspector."
"What?" Jacob looked at her in surprise.
"As my assisting inspector, you have the responsibility to take over the duties from me when it's necessary. If you have any questions, come to me. Usually, the regional inspectors do not have a lot of business to handle, but this time the human cultivators suffered great casualties on our territory, and the cultivation sects on Fifth Heaven and above will probably find someone to blame. You should keep an eye on it."
She took out a white emerald pendant and said,
"Take this. If it turns red, it means that there's a mission for us and you must come to see me."
Thomas.
"Got it." Jacob took the emerald pendant from her. Susan was severely injured because she took the blow for him. It was his duty to share her burden.
"Another thing, you must be careful with Kathy. There is a Grand Master behind her. The regional inspectors can't afford to offend such a figure. Even the North Atlantic Dragon Clan and Dragon God Shrine, the headquarters of the inspector system, can't
Thomas.
afford to offend her."
Susan thought for a moment before giving him this warning. Episode 248, Staying in the Dragon Palace. Got it. Jacob had met the Grandmaster, but he refrained from talking about it, fearing that it would disturb Susan's recovery.
"That's all."
Susan looked at him and said, "Okay." Jacob stood up in embarrassment, feeling her chilly attitude. He walked out of the room and saw that Elder Kayla was boiling the herbs in the yard. He said goodbye to her and walked out of the small palace.
"How is Sue?"
Seeing Jacob walk out, Sophie asked anxiously. "It's not very serious, but she has to stay in the Dragon Palace to recover," Jacob answered, feeling like a doctor coming out of the surgery room. "Okay." Dracon nodded. He turned to General Arthur and instructed, "Take good care of Susan. Provide Elder Kayla any herbs and elixir pills she needs."
"Yes, Your Majesty."
General Arthur took the order. Hearing Susan's wounds were not serious, Sophie was relieved. Then she asked Jacob curiously,
"What did she say to you?"
"I can't tell you." Jacob glanced at her and kept his mouth sealed. Sophie frowned at his answer and asked again,
"Why not?"
Helen smiled in resignation.
"It's a private conversation between Susan and Jacob. Why do you want to know?" I...
Sophie couldn't find a good reason. "It's nothing important. Susan just instructed me to temporarily take over her responsibility as the inspector of this region," Jacob told her, to curb her curiosity. Dracon turned to Liam and said, "Fortunately, our North Atlantic received little damage this time. You should investigate the casualties of the other dragon clans, especially the South Atlantic."
"Yes, Your Majesty."
Liam bowed. Dracon thought for a moment. "After today's event, the land is probably in chaos. To be safe, today everyone stays the night at the Dragon Palace. Elder Liam, you help General Arthur take stock of the properties in the Dragon Palace. We spent a lot of resources on Elder Kenneth's heavenly tribulation, and we need to reallocate the remaining resources." Dracon looked regretful when he mentioned Kenneth's heavenly tribulation. To help Kenneth pass the heavenly tribulation, the North Atlantic had consumed 1/3 of its resources, but Kenneth still failed.
"Dad, when will Uncle Kenneth come back?"
Sophie asked Dracon. "He's traveling while cultivating. He will come back when he's ready," Dracon answered.
"Oh."
Sophie frowned again, not satisfied with this answer. Dracon was strict with her, while Helen was loving yet stern. Only Kenneth spoiled her, giving in to each of her demands. They had shared a strong bond ever since her childhood, which is why Sophie missed him and worried about his safety. "General Arthur, take Jacob and Soph to the rear of the palace to rest. Then summon the core elders to the Grand Hall for a meeting," Drakon said. With a little bow, General Arthur ushered Sophie and Jacob to the back of the Dragon Palace. The rear of the palace was, in fact, the place where all of Drakon's wives would live. However, since Drakon was busy on land and had only one wife, Helen, most of the rooms were empty. Crossing the cold and quiet palace, General Arthur led Jacob and Sophie to a small, beautifully decorated palace. Surrounded by colorful gardens, the palace was exquisite. Leading them into a side room, General Arthur asked carefully, "Princess, Prince, do you need one bed, or—"
"Of course, one bed."
Sophie had been silent all the way here, but at General Arthur's question, she blushed. General Arthur stammered, "And do you want one room, or—" As the manager of the Dragon Palace, he had to ask these questions. He didn't mean to embarrass the princess.
"Of course, 2 rooms."
Sophie hesitated for a couple of seconds before she gave her answer. "Okay, then, Princess, please stay in this room to rest. Prince, please follow me," General Arthur said. Jacob followed General Arthur out of the room. He looked back at Sophie before stepping out. Sophie was looking at the ground very intently, with her face flushed. The moment Jacob stepped out of the room, Sophie blurted out,
"Come back."
With a blush, she looked at General Arthur.
"Put him in my room and give us 2 beds."
General Arthur took the princess's order immediately, without a question. Jacob couldn't contain his smirk when he looked at Sophie. He had known that she would be scared of staying in such a big room by herself. Besides, she rarely lived in the Dragon Palace, and the rooms were at a distance from each other. The bedroom in this palace was luxurious, and there were 2 beds. In the Dragon Palace, Jacob's rank was lower than Sophie's, and he offered to sleep on the smaller bed. The rooms in the palace were well tended, even though they were seldom lived in. General Arthur backed out of the palace quietly as soon as everything was settled. Jacob walked to the smaller bed and found it was made with incense wood. It was a piece of real antique furniture. However, Sophie was used to sleeping on a spring mattress and found it quite uncomfortable to sleep in such an ancient-style bed. It would be a miracle if she could fall asleep in here.
"Prince, Princess, dinner is ready."
2 girls' voices sounded outside of the room. Jacob walked over and opened the door. 2 maids stood there with exquisite platters in their hands. "Okay." Jacob took the platters. When he saw they were still standing there, he waved at them. "You may go back." He walked back into the room and handed one platter to Sophie. Sophie had been summoned from school by Drakon before lunch, and then she had been following Drakon around the Dragon Palace. She was starving. After eating in silence, since they were both quite hungry, Jacob took out Snowflake from his hidden space. The moment Snowflake landed on the ground, it looked around cautiously. Seeing no danger, it began to roll around like a circus performer. "I'll send you to a circus if you continue with these antics." Jacob nudged its stomach with his toes before placing Sophie's dinner box on the floor. Smelling the aroma of the meat and vegetables, Snowflake pounced on the box and began devouring their leftovers from the large meal. With some food in its belly, Snowflake was again lively. With a happy grin, Sophie clapped her hands at it.
"Snowflake, come here."
Jumping up high, Snowflake leaped into her arms. Sophie laughed. Holding its paws, she began to play with it, momentarily forgetting about Jacob.
"Hey, when will you resume tutoring me?"
Sophie asked Jacob abruptly. "Do you want me to continue tutoring you?" Jacob asked. Sophie pursed her lips.
I have lots of stuff that I don't quite understand.
We'll resume the tutoring session tomorrow, okay? Jacob said to her.
Okay.
To his surprise, Sophie nodded without hesitation. I thought she hated school and studying. Jacob looked at her in surprise.
Let's take Snowflake out for a walk.
Sophie put Snowflake down and suddenly suggested. She was bored of staying in the room the whole time. Snowflake skipped happily in front of them without any dignity of being a lion. It was not long after the celebrations for Kenneth's success in passing the Heavenly Tribulation, and the Dragon Palace still had many decorations around the place. After the adjustments in the last couple of weeks, Sophie was no longer that sad. Looking at the celebratory stuff, she became happy again. Snowflake ran in front of them. It looked around curiously and would try to pat the things it had never seen before with its paw. When the Dragon Palace celebrated its holidays, people would establish a temporary market on the east side of the palace. The maids, families of elders, and some off-duty soldiers would play the role of vendors. The other people would be the customers of this temporary market. It was a kind of entertainment. Although the North Atlantic Dragon Palace had plenty of resources, the market was set up to stave off boredom, since many of the people in the palace couldn't go up to land without permission. Sophie took Snowflake to the market. Since she rarely came to the Dragon Palace, many people didn't know her, thinking that she was a family member of an elder. Strings of lanterns hung on the street walls of the market, and the little shops and booths looked quite real. It was like a cosplay show. Sophie was quite at home in the market. She went to a middle-aged man wearing a torn cotton jacket and asked,
How much is one stick of the sugar-coated strawberries?
3 cents for 1 stick, the man answered her with firmness. Although he was wearing a torn cotton jacket, his hard muscles and crisp answer showed that he was, in fact, a guard of the Dragon Palace. This low-ranking guard had never met Sophie, and it was natural that the guard didn't recognize her as the princess.
But I have no money.
Sophie looked at him morosely. Well, in that case, it's free. The guard softened at her genuine problem. This wasn't the mortal world, after all. He plucked a stick of the sugar-coated strawberries and handed it to Sophie. The purpose of their business was entertainment instead of profits. People could take the things for free if they liked them.
Thank you,
Sophie said joyously. No problem. The man grinned before yelling, Sugar-coated strawberries! His yelling was so loud and crisp, as if he was shouting orders. Oblivious to the fact that he had done a favor to the princess, he turned his gaze to the next customer, a kid about 8 years old. The red lanterns lined both sides of the streets, and the booths were full of boisterous crowds. Against the dark of the night, the bright lanterns and lively crowds gave Jacob the illusion that he was at some sort of a lantern festival. He thought of the holiday activities on land and found that they had nothing so fascinating in them. Biting into the sugar-coated strawberries, Sophie walked happily. Snowflake looked up at her with greedy eyes, circling around her ankles.
I'll give you one.
In an excellent mood, Sophie plucked a strawberry from the stick and tossed it to Snowflake. Snowflake leaped up and caught it in its mouth. It landed on the ground, wagging its tail and looking more pleased than eating an essence replenishment pill. Besides food, the booths sold handcrafts that were personally made by the families of the elders. Every piece was pretty, and the materials were pearls and emeralds that were rarely seen on land. Sophie selected carefully and begged for 2 sets from the vendors. In fact, if she showed her identity, she could take whatever she wanted, but she did not want people to squirm in her presence. Jacob followed her around. Occasionally, they tried some snacks. In between, they wandered into the clothes shop, diner, tea house, etc. This was a great idea to relieve all the stress of the day, and they were both finally relaxing again. Although it was only a temporary market, it felt more authentic than those so-called night markets on land. Sophie pulled Jacob with her while she happily visited each shop. Looking at her happy face, Jacob smiled too. When everyone was immersed in the lively atmosphere, the whole Dragon Palace suddenly shook violently. "Enemies!" The guard selling the sugar-coated strawberries yelled. Episode 249, Attack on the Dragon Palace. Everyone was alarmed by the guard's shout. At that moment, the second wave of shaking began. The Dragon Palace shook so violently that the temporary booths collapsed one by one. The items on the walls of the booth next to Jacob and Sophie fell to the ground. Standing upright was difficult. Jacob pulled Sophie into his arms to protect her from being pushed down by the frenzied crowd or being crushed by the falling items. "Snowflake!" Jacob shouted. Understanding Jacob's intent, Snowflake immediately changed into its large form. Jacob pulled Soph up on Snowflake's back and patted its rump. With flames appearing around its paws, Snowflake flew up into the sky. Hovering in the air above the Dragon Palace, they didn't have to worry about the shaking. Holding tightly onto Jacob's waist, Sophie was frightened since she had never seen such a scene before. In the air, Jacob could clearly see that all the rooms in the Dragon Palace were shaking. Obviously, someone was attacking the defense array formation of the palace. Teams of guards appeared in the square in the middle of the palace. A general wearing gold armor saw a spirit beast hovering in the air. He shouted, "Who's in the air?" In the Dragon Palace, with the exceptions of the king and queen and several core elders, no one could fly inside. On Snowflake's broad back, Sophie stuck out her face. The general, wearing gold armor, saw her and immediately bowed, saying, "Sorry, I didn't know it was you, princess." Under Jacob's steering, Snowflake lowered slowly, hovering in the air, 1/2 meter from the ground. Sophie looked at the general.
"What's happening?"
"The defense array formation is being attacked. We are investigating," the general answered respectfully. He couldn't give her a definite answer without looking into it. As the general of the guards, he knew everything that was happening outside the Dragon Palace. The attack may have come from either South Atlantic, the cultivators from Fifth Heaven, the demon beasts, or some independent master who had a grudge with the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. It was no secret that the North Atlantic Dragon Palace enjoyed great resources. Long, long ago, some super powerful masters even came to the North Atlantic to rob the palace. Then, the shaking stopped. Dracon came out of the main palace with the core elders. "What happened?" Jacob steered Snowflake to the ground and helped Sophie get off. "The defense array formation on the outer edge of the palace was under attack. I'm waiting for the information from the soldiers in the outer range. I'm sorry that your majesty was disturbed." The general, wearing gold armor, bowed to the Dragon King. "Do a thorough investigation and find out who dared to attack our Dragon Palace." Dracon looked angry. "From now on, double the patrolling soldiers and kill any intruders who try to break into the palace." "Yes, your majesty." The general, wearing gold armor, took the order in a resonant voice. Dracon then looked at Jacob and Sophie. You two go back to your rooms and don't come out without permission. Chief Ezra, please lead a team of elite guards and station them at Soph's palace."
"Yes, Your Majesty."
Chief Ezra took the order. Under Chief Ezra's escort, Jacob and Sophie returned to their palace. Jacob smiled at Sophie in an attempt to reassure her, but he was worried about the attack the Dragon Palace had just received. The Dragon Palace was the home base of the North Atlantic, so the attack against it was totally different than a battle somewhere else. Back in the bedroom, Sophie yawned and beckoned at Snowflake, who had followed her into the room. Snowflake leapt into her arms, and she carried it into her big bed. Lifting its ears, she said,
"Turn big."
Snowflake turned into a large lion. Satisfied, she took the furry lion into her arms and shifted to a comfortable position. Then she slept.
"Well, I didn't know that Snowflake could be used to cuddle with,"
Jacob thought with resignation. His bed was only half as big as Sophie's, but it was big enough for him to sleep in. In this super spacious ancient bedroom, incense was burning, reminding him of ancient times. Shortly, Sophie and Snowflake were sound asleep. Their breathing was so in sync that Jacob highly suspected Sophie was also a small demon beast. He sat down on the bed cross-legged and cultivated the Sword Shadow scroll. After circulating the scroll 187 times, Jacob opened his eyes and saw the faint morning light leaking into the room through the crack between the engraved wooden doors. Although the Dragon Palace was concealed on the bottom of the ocean, it also had night and day. The only difference was the climate. It had no change of seasons, and every day was as warm as a day in spring. Seeing Sophie was still sound asleep with Snowflake in her arms, Jacob stretched and got off his bed. He leaned over and watched her. She slept with pursed lips, and her hair was all over the place. With her arms wound around Snowflake, it looked like a giant, fluffy toy. Due to her small size, her whole body snuggled against Snowflake's belly. Walking out of the bedroom quietly, he breathed in the fresh air of the small garden. He knew nothing about the strange flowers and herbs in the garden. Suddenly, a mini-sized snowflake shot out from the room and ran around Jacob's ankles, looking cheerful. "Good morning to you, too," Jacob sighed and walked out of the palace. On the square outside of the palace, Chief Ezra was training a team of soldiers. Seeing Jacob, he immediately bowed.
"Good morning, Prince."
"Good morning, Chief Ezra." Jacob walked over and saw that the soldiers were practicing. He asked, "What are you practicing?"
"Prince, it's a set of military boxing techniques. It has no name. If you must have it, you can call it fundamental boxing techniques,"
Chief Ezra answered. Jacob nodded, finding the movements sharp and tough. He thought for a few seconds and said, "Chief, can I learn it?" Chief Ezra was surprised.
"With your high status, I think this set of techniques is a bit crude."
"No, I think they're very effective. With the current tense situation, I must do my share," Jacob said. Chief Ezra looked at him again in surprise. After a moment of hesitation, he said,
"Okay, I'll show you the movements."
He made a horse stance in front of the line of soldiers. Horse stance punch. It was a basic pose of martial arts. Jacob took off his jacket and copied his movement. He had been a long-distance runner when he was in middle school, and horse stance was a part of the training. That was why he had great strength in his legs. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to catch Sophie falling from the sky that first time. Gradually, the soldiers paused their practice and watched the general and the prince. As the leader of the palace guards, Chief Ezra was not rusty with his fundamental techniques. Each kick and punch were on point. Jacob copied each movement in earnest. Snowflake squatted on a nearby stone step and looked at Jacob with its black eyes, seemingly baffled. After he finished the whole set of movements, Jacob was soaked in sweat. However, Chief Ezra, in his heavy armor, was breathing as evenly as before. Cultivation could improve his physical strength, but it couldn't bring him fortitude. Kenneth was the kind of person that cultivated both essence and martial arts. Without using his cultivation strength, he could still be able to kill a fierce tiger with one punch. Susan paid more attention to the elevation of realms. Jacob wondered if she practiced sword techniques in her home or jogged each morning. I need to follow your movements 3 times before I can memorize them. Chief Ezra, please show me again. Wiping sweat from his forehead, Jacob said. Chief Ezra was even more surprised. He had thought the prince was just curious, but it seemed like he was serious. The soldiers practiced boxing each day, so they wouldn't get tired if they practiced it 3 times in one morning. He wondered if the prince could withstand the hardship. Chief, please. Seeing that Chief Ezra didn't move, Jacob urged him. Okay. Chief Ezra moved into position and showed him the techniques a second time. It took at least 1 hour to finish the whole set of basic fist techniques, and it would take 3 hours to practice it 3 times. Jacob walked out of the palace at dawn and saw the soldiers were already there drilling. He knew they were hard-working. At the end of the 3rd time, Jacob felt he was exhausted since he had used his physical strength instead of his cultivation strength. The soldiers stood there and whispered to each other. If the prince had practiced once, it could be called a show, but 3 times meant that he intended to fight enemies with them, just like Kenneth, who always charged at the enemies before the soldiers, despite his royal status as the Dragon King's brother. Thank you, Chief Ezra. I'll practice as often as I can. Jacob bowed at Chief Ezra. At a loss for words, Chief Ezra bowed back at Jacob. He had secretly thought the prince was weak, but he changed his mind when Jacob practiced the techniques 3 times. With the enemies outside, even the prince couldn't stay behind. Jacob took Snowflake back to the palace. When he was crossing the small garden, he noticed some golden fruits dangling among the plants. But he didn't pay much attention to them, thinking they were part of the unique features of the herbs, which withered in the morning and revealed the fruits inside. In the bedroom, Sophie was still sound asleep. The girl was indeed a master of sleeping. The soldiers had finished their drills and began patrolling the palace. Last night, they had been stationed near the palace in which Jacob and Sophie stayed to protect them. A moment later, Liam came with Dracon's order to pick up Sophie for school. Sophie yawned, but didn't disobey her father's order. When they returned to the seaside, Jacob saw a car parked on the roadside about 10 meters away. The moment Jacob's cell phone received signals again, it rang. It was from a phone number from another city. Hello? Jacob answered.
Jacob, this is Grandma. I'm coming home today.
Jacob's grandma's voice came through from the phone. Episode 250, The New Class President. Grandma? Jacob was surprised. You're coming back on your own? Should I come to pick you up?
Don't worry and focus on your studies. I'm coming back with a friend from my hometown who's coming to the city for some errands. He can accompany me back,
Grandma said on the other side of the phone. Around what time will you be back? Jacob was excited. He had a great relationship with his grandma, so he missed her a lot after such a long time.
The train arrives at 5 p.m., and my friend will go do his work after dropping me off. You don't need to come and pick me up,"
she said in a pleasant tone. It seemed like she had a great time on her vacation. "Okay, I'll come back to spend some time with you tonight then." Jacob hung up the phone cheerfully. Sophie came over after he got off the phone.
"Grandma's coming back?"
"Yes." Jacob nodded with a smile. His phone rang again. It was still Grandma.
"I forgot to tell you to bring Soph along. I brought her some local specialties."
"Okay." Before Jacob hung up, Grandma added,
"Invite Kathy as well. I brought her some too."
"Grandma, are you trying to start a war?" Jacob thought to himself. Grandma hung up the phone cheerfully before Jacob had time to respond. Sophie got closer after the call.
"What did Grandma say? Did she bring me gifts?"
"Some local specialties," Jacob answered.
"Really? Is that right?"
She got so excited her eyes were shining.
"Did she bring sweet potatoes?"
Jacob looked at her and shrugged. "All you know is sweet potatoes."
"Mr. Jacob, Miss Soph, please get in the car."
Liam opened the door in front of them. Sophie lightly pulled on the edge of Jacob's shirt.
"Hey, can you ask Grandma to bring some sweet potatoes?"
"I'll ship you a truck of them if you get first place in your class on the finals." Jacob sat in the car and turned back to her. Sophie rolled her eyes at that and hit his arm playfully. Liam drove steadily, not caring about the banter between the two. It was a bit chilly in the morning at the beach. The sky above the city was back to normal, and the Nine Dragon Palace, which appeared for a week, had disappeared already. Jacob was kind of used to seeing the palace by now, and the sky felt odd without it. The car arrived at the school's gate, and Sophie got out of the car. She turned back to Jacob and stuck her tongue out at him in place of a farewell, and went off laughing as Jacob chuckled at her antics as well. She didn't bring her backpack today. Who knew how she would be able to study today? Liam started the vehicle and headed steadily toward the university. "Elder Liam, are there any updates on the attack at the Dragon Palace last night?" Jacob asked seriously.
"Not for now, but we suspect that it was the South Atlantic's trial attack,"
Liam answered with a serious look on his face.
"They have sent over a very powerful person this time."
"Who is it?" Jacob immediately asked.
"His nickname is Reggie, and he is at mid-tier 8th level. Although he hasn't reached the top tier yet, other mid-tier 8th level masters wouldn't be able to defeat him,"
Liam said.
"Reggie."
Jacob repeated his name quietly.
"He showed up in the city under the secret mission of protecting their prince, Henry. However, he is actually a very skilled assassin and intelligence agent. It is very obvious what the South Atlantic's intention is by sending him here,"
Liam continued. "Is Soph going to be okay?" Jacob was a little worried.
"They wouldn't dare to do anything to Miss Soph yet. Plus, we have arranged some masters in her school to protect her,"
Liam answered. Jacob was still worried, despite Liam's answer. However, it would probably be overly dramatic to hide Soph in the Dragon Palace due to a simple move from the South Atlantic. He landed his hand on the necklace on his chest and felt the coiled dragon golden spear lying quietly inside. It was Henry's natal treasure, and it was still in Jacob's hands. Even an idiot would be able to come to the conclusion that Henry would for sure seek an opportunity to scramble for the treasure. Especially now that the Nine Dragon Palace event had finished, how could Henry let his natal treasure stay in someone else's hands?
"Be careful yourself. No matter what, you are a core member of the clan, and your technique is the weakest,"
Liam said. "I know." Jacob revolved the sword shadow technique smoothly in his body as the Dragon Core secretly became active as well. 39 of the openings had been broken through, and one more would get him to the 3rd level.
Though Susan intended to protect you when she asked you to become her assisting inspector,
Liam said abruptly,
it is a serious crime to attack an inspector, even just an assisting inspector. The South Atlantic wouldn't risk it unless they have to. Plus, Soph is the princess, and North Atlantic would fight to the death with them if they harm her. Therefore, they wouldn't dare act rashly.
Jacob nodded thoughtfully. Reuniting with his grandma was the most important thing on his mind at the moment. The vehicle entered the university. If the students saw Liam, the vice principal, driving Jacob to school, they would be surprised to a point where their eyes would pop out.
"Thank you,
Principal Liam." Jacob hesitated as he exited the vehicle. It was better to address Liam as the principal at the university.
"Go to your class. I have already let the department know about this, but make sure your grades aren't too bad,"
Liam said. "Okay, I know." Jacob headed to the class in a rush. It wasn't his intention to skip classes, but there was one issue after another with North Atlantic. However, there shouldn't be many things going on after the Nine Dragon Palace event this time. All his classmates were already in the classroom when he entered. Kathy was tidying up her notes in the front row. She smiled at Jacob when she saw him enter.
"Damn it, Jacob, you skipped another day of classes,"
one of the guys shouted from the back. Jacob walked over. "Is everything all right?" Ryan sat up from his seat.
"I have 2 pieces of news, a big one and a small one. Which one would you like to hear first?"
Jacob rolled his eyes and made a mess of Ryan's hair. "Tell me both," he said as he smoothed his hair with his fingers.
"The big news is that Kyle went to London."
"What?" Although Jacob had already heard the gossip, he was still surprised.
"I haven't finished yet."
Ryan was excited.
"He announced Sam as the captain of the basketball team right before he left. Sam is now the captain of the team, even though he has only been a member for less than a month."
Sam will be leading the school basketball team through the rest of the basketball league? Jacob was surprised.
"Yeah, and he's leading training in the sports center right now. How cool is that? The basketball team captain. He was still playing with us a few weeks ago,"
Ryan said with excitement, as if the captain was himself. "And what is the small news?" Jacob asked.
"The small news is,"
Ryan looked ahead,
"Kathy resigned as the class president."
"Oh." Jacob looked at Kathy from the back in surprise. He asked, "Who's the new class president?" Ryan pointed to himself.
"He's right in front of you."
Jacob turned over. "You?" Ryan smirked.
"You didn't expect me to become the class president, did you?"
"Damn it, our class is doomed," Jacob sighed.
"Orders, everyone. Sit down and get ready for class. Sit down."
Ryan pointed to the front as he shouted, standing on his chair. Nothing about him looked like a class president. He actually looked like a clown. Kathy had her head down, looking at her notes, not caring about anything. She felt as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders without the class president title. The day passed by quickly. As the newly promoted class president, Ryan misused his authority a lot. He was even walking with a straighter back. Kathy was way more low-key in comparison. She paid attention in classes, went to the cafeteria with her friend, and borrowed books from the library. She sure would be sad, since her brother just left for London the day before. The brother who took care of her all along had now left the university and the city. Jacob sent Kathy a text between the last 2 classes in the afternoon. Grandma came back home, and she invited you over tonight." Kathy turned back immediately with a surprised look on her face. She then turned around to type on her cell phone. Soon enough, Jacob received her message.
"Okay, let's leave together after class."
"Stop playing on your phone," Ryan reprimanded suddenly. Jacob took in a deep breath. He really missed the days when Kathy was still the class president. After the 2 classes, Ryan dashed to the podium. "Let me make an announcement now." All the students ignored him and left. "What are we eating for dinner? Noodles? There's probably a movie playing in the club." They chatted as they exited the classroom. Ryan was stupefied on the podium. "Damn it, do I really lack prestige?" Jacob secretly laughed at him. He patted Kathy's shoulder and left the classroom with her.
"I haven't seen Grandma for a long time,"
she said happily. Jacob wasn't sure if it was his misconception to think that Kathy was more like a friend without the class president title. "Yeah, she insisted that you come over. Let's go," Jacob told Kathy as they walked down the stairs. Ryan was still yelling in the classroom. "Come back, everyone! I have an announcement to make!"